Hello, everyone. Welcome to the video. Today, we're going to be talking about how modern agriculture is draining our resources and destroying the planet that we live on. So, this is what I call the calorie trap, and I'll go into exactly how this works and how we fall into this trap of essentially consuming more calories than we produce. So, I'm going to share my screen. And this is just a little diagram of exactly how this system works. This is our current degenerative system that we live in. So, in terms of agriculture, and this is really only one of the systems that we have that we use. So, this doesn't have to do as well with education or energy or really anything else. This has to do with agriculture itself. So, this explains from source to sink how we get the resources that we do for agriculture, how we transport the food, where it all comes from, and where it goes. And everyone is essentially disconnected from this modern agricultural cycle that is inherently destructive at its core and consumes more than it could ever possibly produce over its life cycle. So, at the source, we have essentially mining oil out of the ground. So this is where we drill for oil. This oil is what we process to fuel all of the machines for agriculture. And this is essentially what we do is we drill oil from the ground and then process it into fuel, and then that fuel goes into all the machines, like those huge agriculture machines that you see in farm states. This has to do with not only tractors and all of those machines, but any of the handheld machines that use gas. Anything that uses gasoline, this is where it comes from. So then after that, essentially what we do in modern agriculture, which is called monoculture, is we usually clear cut all the trees in an area. So we clear cut all the trees and then we plant one crop for acres or even miles in some circumstances. So we clear cut all the trees and then we plant essentially one crop like corn or soy, or any of the other big crops in the United States. And what this does is it destroys diverse ecosystems, and it also removes all the shade that the trees produce for the food. So it removes the shade from the sun, which exposes the soil too much to the sun itself, and which eventually dries it out. And that's a whole other process as well. Once we've clear cut all these trees, and this is happening on a massive scale, not usually in the media, it's talked about that the clear cutting is happening in the Amazon. That's not true. We are still clear cutting here. That's why there are essentially no old growth forests in North America anymore, or United States, is because we've clear cut all of them to make way for essentially pasture or these monocrop systems. So after we've clear cut it all, we use it as lumber, right? And that's transported somewhere else off of the property. So nothing is really utilized on the property, and you'll see even the plants aren't really utilized on the property as well. So then we use that clear cut ground to produce essentially um, this one plant. So that would be corn in a lot of sense. There are some states where it's almost entirely just corn, and maybe some cows. And that's usually the main source of income for a lot of these farms is cows, maybe pigs, and then corn, maybe soy. I know in the rainforest, it's really popular to do soy because that grows there very well. Um, so we grow the plants, right? But we only usually grow one plant. And then we take that plant, right? And what it does in the process of growing this plant is it takes nutrients from the soil, and the plant uses those nutrients to create food, right? In the form, essentially in the form of energy or calories, in the form of food. So when this plant grows, it takes nutrients from the ground and produces food in the form of corn in this example. But instead of people eating that food near or on the land, and then that food through the process of excretion coming out and going back onto the land as waste, in the same sense that cows eat grass and then poop it back out onto the land. Instead of that happening, what we do is we take these nutrients that we've essentially mined from the ground, and then we transport them and ship them off the property. Essentially, we're robbing nutrients from the soil and then taking them elsewhere. And this is the beginning of this very sick system. So not only do we drill oil and essentially take it from the ground way over here and then ship that over here so that we can use the fuel, so that we can cut down the trees, right? So that we can clear cut and then plant one crop. Not only are we doing all of that, destroying diversity in the ecosystems, and then planting essentially a non-diverse ecosystem of one plant. Essentially the opposite of what would be described as something that could have natural integrity, like the diverse ecosystems have that integrity because they feed back into each other. Not only do we do all that, but then once we've actually produced the nutrients that give us calories, that give us energy, not only do we do that, but then we ship those calories and nutrients somewhere else, usually all across either the world or all across the country. And what this does is it displaces the nutrients that are in the soil, which is a crazy, stupid system. It's just ridiculous. It's insane. And the insanity doesn't stop there. And this is at the foundation of what I would call the overall degenerative modern system that we have now that essentially only has one destination, which is destruction. Um, so to remedy essentially robbing nutrients from the soil and taking it somewhere else, to remedy this, we then go to a different location, right? And this is all using the fuel, right, from the beginning that we drill from the ground over here and transport over here. Now we we use that fuel to go over here and then mine rocks or mine rocks from the ground using explosives and digging to then take those rocks, process them and crush them, powder them, process them into minerals that we then spray back onto the ground that we have taken the nutrients from. Okay, so this is just the beginning of how crazy it is. So we take oil from over here, we use it here, we cut all the trees down, we take the nutrients in the form of food from here, then we ship that food all over the place here. Then after that, we take minerals in the form of rocks from over here, and then we process them, and then we put them back onto the very soil that we took the nutrients from to begin with, all using the fuel from drilling oil from over here. It's like this whole crazy, just insane, wasteful, inefficient way of doing things and having a societal system. And it doesn't stop there. So usually the nutrients that you put back on the soil is actually incomplete. A lot of the nutrients available aren't very complete for the soil. That would naturally happen if we ate the food and then we pooped it back out onto the land, which is what happens in nature all the time. It is this cycle of consumption, of production and consumption and waste in this whole cycle. And really, it's not even waste because nothing is wasted in that sense. When a cow eats grass, it poops it on the ground. And this is all displaced in a natural way. And that poop becomes fertilizer, right, for the ground. And that creates fertility over time. And this is very well known in ecology, biology, and all of this process is sidestepped, right? And what we do actually is we take poop and then we process it and then we fill bags with it and we call it manure and then we put manure onto the soil. And it's like, how crazy is that? We disrupt the entire natural process and replace it with this insane, stupid, inefficient system when in nature everything is super efficient, right? The cow eats the corn, right? It uses it as energy. Then the waste from the body is then used by the plants to create more food and to create fertility there. And that's only really talking about the poop in a macro sense because it has all the microbes in it to fertilize the soil as well because the microbiome of the soil is a huge part of its fertility, not just nutrients. And that also goes for the human body, but that's a whole nother story. So because at this time, the soil that we have is degrading, but the soil of our bodies is degrading as well. And I'll go into that in a separate video. But it's the same with health and education and all these things. It's become so centralized in this inefficient way that we can't really do almost anything about this kind of degenerative system. So what this does after you rob the nutrients from the soil and you give it back kind of an incomplete nutrition and you disrupt this whole natural cycle, what happens is it leads to desertification over time. And so essentially what we're doing is we're creating deserts from the agriculture that we promote. From this inefficiency, we are going to create this chaos that will have to be balanced in some way over time. And that desertification is that balance. So the diseases, the malnourishment, all these different things, yes, they're all signs and symptoms, but they equalize it over time. So the plagues and the famine and all these things, what they do is they eventually bring about this equilibrium to the system. But we need to just stop sidestepping these natural processes and get back in sync with them. So then right, once we've transported all these nutrients in the form of food off the land using tremendous energy, so transporting them all over the place. You've now, in the process of transporting them, they are now losing nutrients, no matter how well you can preserve them with refrigeration. You've taken them from the area they were grown and then put them into refrigeration, which reduces the nutrient content of the food itself. Thus, essentially, you're just losing energy through this whole process. Then it's transported to grocery stores, right? Where it sits in more refrigeration and loses more of its nutrients. And then after that, we transport ourselves to the grocery store and then we transport that food back to the house where it sits in a refrigerator again and loses more of its nutrients. And by the time it gets to our refrigerator and then by the time it gets to our mouths, it has now gone through the most wasteful and inefficient way to get food to our mouths. The most efficient way is if we grow that food, we eat it, and then that that's excreted by our bodies goes back onto the land. That is the most efficient way to do it. And that is not even the end of this ridiculous cycle. Um, After we eat it, we poop it into tap water, and then it gets sent to the city to be processed in a treatment plant. And I just have to say that this is possibly the most insane way that you could design an agricultural system. It's the most insane way that we could do things. It is so detached from nature and so detached from the reality of the situation that it is almost like there could not possibly be a way to fix this. And this is not even really the true sink, the source and sink. You could say after that, after that treatment, it gets sent back to everyone, right? So now, yes, there is some positivity to this in the sense that it would be better if we processed all of everyone's waste in this way instead of just throwing it back in the way that other countries do it, where it just runs out into the water. Sure, we do need to process it in this way because we have a lot of unnatural things in our society. So I'm not saying we need to necessarily stop treatment of these things for the time being, but this whole system needs to be restructured and decentralized. And I wrote this quote here um, that this amount of degeneracy is too much to handle. It is too big of a problem. So the mind usually disassociates from it. Um, it is too overwhelming to imagine every aspect of our lives is based on this broken system of production, consumption, and waste management. When in nature, nothing is wasted, not even a molecule. It is truly a vast and comprehensive conspiracy of ignorance and greed. To imagine that there is no better system than the one we have is either of great denial, great ignorance, or great delusion. And this is truly and honestly what I believe. So, I hope this kind of begins to lift this veil that people imagine that we have in America. We have just the best system that we could possibly have. And that is literally the opposite. It is the most detached from reality. It is the most detached from nature. It is the most detached from science. Just the art of efficiency, the art of, the sciences of biology and ecology and how things work. It is just the exact opposite, and it only suits big corporations. That is all that it suits. It suits these mega conglomerates and these huge corporations that make these monocrops and all these industrial chemicals that we spray on the food that we all the drugs that we give to the animals, all this stuff, it compounds and it compounds. And it is essentially a big corporate lie that any of it works and that it is going towards any destination but total annihilation, because that is what it goes towards. It goes towards infertility, it goes towards destruction, degeneration, right? And we need to move towards fertility, towards regeneration, right? Towards creation, towards cultivation, restoration, those kinds of things. Um, Most of the reason that this system still exists is because of the kind of the momentum of history and the momentum of our lives and just our inability to radically change this type of system. And I don't think you can even change it really. I think it is so far gone in the wrong direction that it would take a millennia to probably change this type of system. And to me, I wrote this. It's like trying to change this is almost like putting icing on a turd. It's kind of like fluffing it up a bit, being like, "Oh, this is great. We can transport it, but maybe with less energy. I don't know." Um, it will never be a cupcake, and it will still taste like shit when you take a bite out of it. And that's really, that is the honest truth of this, is that it is probably impossible to change this. There needs to be a wardrobe change. We need to have a breakaway from this status quo. Um, because this way of living, this societal model is fundamentally at odds with living correctly and living rightly and living aligned with reality, with nature, with biology, with ecology. And in the same way, it leads our society to destruction, to desertification, right? To famine, to disease, to plagues, to all of these things that will destroy us. Um, and now I want you to imagine a different system. So I want you to imagine a more regenerative system, right? Imagine if the food that we ate didn't leave the land and we fed ourselves from the land. Imagine if the way we grew our food also nourished the land and the plants and the animals and the fungi that live there. Imagine if we could live regeneratively instead of degeneratively. Imagine if we didn't need to drill for oil or clear cut trees. What type of system would that be? And I spoke on it earlier a little bit. It would be a natural system. So a cow eats grass and poops it back onto the soil, and that fertilizes the soil. It's very basic. It's just basic biology. It's basic ecology. There's nothing special really about it. It's actually just following what happens in nature and using the natural world as a blueprint for how exactly we need to structure our systems. Um, so we eat food and ship the waste from that food elsewhere to be processed by the government. Our food, the food that we eat, should go into our bodies to become energy when the food is at its highest nutrient density, and then go back into the land once our bodies excrete it as waste, which is perfect. That sounds like the perfect way to live so that the nutrients from our bodies then feed the plants, which then feeds the animals, and the cycle continues on and on. But this is just nature. This is just this is what I would call the natural agricultural cycle of production and consumption, and is what humanity must move towards as a whole. Um, it essentially requires of us a bioregional or local and seasonal eating schedule to align with nature. So it kind of decentralizes this whole process of growing food, of eating food, of community, of society, of all these different things. But that is a good thing that there is somewhat a decentralization or a restructuring of this because it has to be that way. Um, so this fundamentally moving towards a regenerative system is the way that we can get out of this calorie trap. Um, and this calorie trap that I'm talking about is draining our resources and is going to destroy the planet. And it is only one aspect of it. It doesn't go into energy. It doesn't go into education. It doesn't go into the military. I mean, like I said, it's a vast conspiracy of ignorance and greed. And the only answer to it, the only antidote, is to move towards a more regenerative system and ultimately what I call the integrated natural living system. The answer isn't, although people like to say that, it's like, oh, the green movement, that's the answer. Oh, all these movements, oh, global warming, oh, this, that, and the other. There's no like high tech answer for it, and you can't just put the modern band-aid treatments on it. So the modern world is characterized by band-aid treatments that don't address the root causes of the issues that we face in terms of health, education, all these different things. Um, this isn't like this isn't this isn't some complicated thing. It's actually just a return to sanity. It's a return to a way that we are integrated with reality itself. It's about functionality and efficiency. It's actually not about tree hugging or kind of ideologies. It's actually about functionality, practicality, efficiency, and looking to nature because nature is most functional, it is most efficient, it is most efficacious in ways that we have not been able to mimic entirely. We cannot make systems as efficient as nature. Just a tree itself, with no mechanical pumps or anything like that, can transport tons of water up into the air. Um, we can live more efficiently and effectively. But we need to do certain things in order for us to evolve in that direction. So what it starts with really is reconnection to the land, right? To our bodies and to this entire ecosystem that we're a part of. And a lot of that starts with choosing food from your region, right? And eating in a way that aligns with the natural cycles of production, consumption, and recycling. So it starts to close these vicious cycles of this kind of modern feedback loop, this vicious cycle of what is production, consumption, and then waste, right? And then just piling and piling up waste and landfills and all the hazardous waste that we just pile up and all the nuclear waste and all this waste. It's just a wasteful culture. It starts with growing things. I mean, anything at all, really, to begin with. Even if it's just like herbs on your windowsill or, a compost bin, for your scraps. That's the beginning of this regenerative phase, is really starting to integrate some of these things into your life and starting to sync up with these natural cycles that we've been disconnected and detached from over time. So we as well, we do not need to wait for permission or some kind of global shift in consciousness to take place. We do not need the media to give us permission for doing these things either. We don't need them to say, now is the time to be green. Now is the time to start composting. Now is the time to start doing all of these things. Now is the time to start aligning yourself with nature. Now is the time to stop listening to the fear mongering about living more naturally. So what we need to do, instead of asking permission or waiting for this permission from the media or the government or really anyone for that matter, even me, is you need to start asking for forgiveness, because we are the shift, right? And we are part of this world. So that's what we need to do. We need to start asking for forgiveness. We need to start taking action for the world we want to create. Because I can tell you right now, we do not want the future world that the modern agricultural system, the modern energy, education, all these systems, we do not want that world that is being created by those things. And these are the steps that we need to take. We need to start going in that direction that is more aligned with reality. So, thanks for watching, guys. Tune in next time and subscribe for more content. Let's make this type of shift happen, one step at a time, and we can truly build a future worth inheriting together. Thank you.